There's a Zohar in Parshas Pinchas that the Zohar notes that Klal Yisrael have a very unique, idiosyncratic tendency that when they learn and they pray, they daven, they shokel, they shake. You don't find this in other cultures. You don't find other nations doing that. And the Zohar compares it to a flame. The flame, the source of the neshama of the Jew, is from a unique quarry, and it's like taking a flame and transferring it from one realm to another. And the flame tends to flicker, it dances. So when the Jew is learning and davening, he is in touch with that initial injection of life in his neshama, in his soul, and it flickers, it dances, it's reaching. There's an Ovestor of Noson that says that every time we learn, it's a revisiting of the moment of Sinai. And just like there, it was trembling. It was a moment of being overwhelmed with the extraordinary drama, power of the experience. When we learn, we're revisiting that moment in Sinai. In a sense, that is what the Ramban says, that it's a pen tishkach, there's a love not to forget. Every time we learn, we should be re-simulating that experience of the moment at Sinai. We are then in touch with another level. So that's the Zohar, and that's the Ovestor of Noson. There's a Orchus HaRosh Milonil, Rishon, that makes a very interesting differentiation. Minig Yisrael, as we say in Latin, a Minig Yisrael geht nicht zu Fuß, doesn't get lost. Minig Yisrael, Klal Yisrael intuitively has some reason for developing its minig. Sometimes we get onto it and sometimes we don't. The Orchus HaRosh Milonil points out that learning, we shuckle forward and back. That is the tendency. There was a period of time up till Reb Gamliel where we learned Ba'amida, we learned standing, also shuckling. Get you a special Yeshivish grammar book with shuckling as the participle form of to shuckle, right? Davening, more often than not, we daven to the sides. We shuckle, but we shuckle to the sides. Halodovahu, Klal Yisrael. Says the Ohr Rosh Melonil that learning, the prerequisite for learning is hishtachavo. We have to be mishtachave like was the moment at Sinai. Sinai there was hishtachavo. Each group from its distance, from its place. So as we are simulating, revisiting that moment, learning is an act of hishtachavo. So Stern from Eses Teva has a pirush that he wrote on Chumash, very, very, very interesting things. So he says possibly that the davening is bekolot moisai toimarno. My entire all my atzomos, all my evorim have to be invested in the moment of tefillah. I think there's an additional message here. As we here in the Beis Medrash have become aware, the learning is rooted in understanding the relationship of the deiros. There's a Novi. There's Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. There's a Tana. There's an Ameira. There are Ge'onim, Rishonim, Acharonim. And it's the relationship. How many Gemaras have we here in this Beis Medrash come across that Tzakasha, the Ameira, can't challenge the position of a Tana. Could be a Braisa he didn't know, and the Gemara has to say that Rav Tanahu Polik, that's a fallback position. That Rav had dual visa. He was a resident in both areas. But otherwise, it's a Seder. There's a Seder. Because the closer we were to Sinai, the less static there was that was frustrating the clarity of the broadcast. And because there was more clarity, then Jews were able to fulfill their limud HaTorah on another level, with another dimension of plugging in to the emes. So learning is rooted in appreciating the nuances of the map, the chronology, the chronological map of the relationship between the days. To what extent do I have to break my head on understanding what was just said? Well, I've said it here in the past. In the yeshiva, we used to say somebody who challenges the decision of the Gemara that's tantamount to apikosis. Somebody who challenges the Rambam is kind of foolish, improbable, but not impossible. The Vilna Gaon was a throwback to earlier generations, and he could and did at times differ from Rishonim. That was unique, but that was by consensus of opinion and position that awarded him that level. But Ravina Ravashi, that is, Ramban says that the redaction of the Talmud by Ravina Ravashi was a summation of the positions and a filtering to the conclusions based on the criteria of Chazal that was enacted with Ruach HaKodesh. There's another dimension. There's another dimension there. Okay, so we're talking about Limud Torah and Tefillah. Gemara on Shabbos, Daf Yud, reports an incident that one of the Amoraim seemed to be davening excessively long, and he was critiqued by another Amora. You're leaving Chayei Olam, you're leaving the eternal life, and you're engaged in the ephemeral, in temporary. Some of Mephoshim explain it. Davening, you're asking for health, for bread, for panosa, for tranquility, for peace, for your needs here, now. Whereas Torah is everything. That's the grand plan for the universe. Predated the existence of man. Rebbeinu Shalom had it, mystical concepts, very limited, but it was inscribed in black fire on white fire before it was applied to the universe, and then man, and v'chulu v'chulu. So Torah is the totality. Histakel v'aysa bor alma. It's everything. That's Chaya Yolam Habo. And the Torah is what tells us where, when, and how to daven. Nefesh Chaim explains that Chaya is sure that davening, because there are certain windows that the Rebbeinu Shalom has given, has created in the world. And those windows, if we enter in at the right time with our petition, the petition is not just a petition, the Loshen Tefillah Brocha is somehow we have been given the ability to amplify the revelation of Kedusha in the Bria. We don't add anything to the Rebbeinu Shalom, but we can, as the Giluyim, the revelations of the Rebbeinu Shalom go through the different spheres, there can be a greater exposure and revelation of them on our level and access to them, which then increases the intensity, the quality, the character of the Kedusha in our environment, and us as part of that environment. So that's a moment of opportunity, it's a window of opportunity. Sfas Emes says a little differently. Sfas Emes says that we're in need, we're dependent on Olam Hazeh in order to access what we have to access. So he emphasizes more that that there is theoretically like the machlekes between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Yishmael, the perfect Talmid Chacham transcends any kind of dependency to do the hishtadlus. Then it's malachtecho nases al yedei acherim, and others will do what has to be done for you to get to where you have to go. Okay, so today is the Yahrtzeit of Reb Meir Simcha. Meir Simcha Zatzal over 40 years ago, standing here where I'm standing, Libod Ben Chaim L'Chaim, Reb Shlomo Freifeld was talking about the choice of the name Ohr Somayach for the yeshiva. And he recalled the Rogachova's Hesped. They were, as could be imagined, they had a lot of differences in halacha and many ideas, but a common appreciation of the greatness of each other, a shared. And by the Levaya, the Rogachova said, the average person, how much weight can he lift up? 50 kilos, 75 kilos. But everybody knows if he happens to be, lo aleinu, in a building that's on fire and a burning beam falls on him, suddenly the adrenaline flows and he can pick up 100, 150 kilo. He functions on a different level. Reb Meir Simcha performed every moment of his life, of his existence, as if the building was on fire. That's what characterized Reb Meir Simcha. On the other hand, more than once, Rav Shach Zatzal told me the story as somebody he knew came in to Reb Meir Simcha and came into Reb Meir Simcha in the middle of the week, and Reb Meir Simcha and his wife were being mesameach, a young couple. Rav Shach, as was his habit, looked at me over his glasses and he said to me, it wasn't even Rosh Chodesh. What was it? Middle of the week. They're singing, they're being mesameach them. This couple had come for a get, and they were working a few months with them, and Reb Meir Simcha finally got them to agree not to take the get. So Reb Meir Simcha called in his wife, Rebbetzin, there's a new chosen in Kala here. You have to be mesameach them. This is something that, just read it, last week's Parsha. The Odom Eitz Soda, man is like a fruit-bearing tree. Sefer Yosha says, but he's an inverted tree. His shorosh and his roots are in Shemayim. We only see the branches and sometimes the fruit. But what's the famous advice, counsel that's given to leadership? Don't lose the forest for the trees. Keep the big picture. By Gedolei Torah, we see the converse, and only by Gedolei Torah lahavdil. Don't lose the trees for the forest. Every individual, every yochid, each tree, it's precious, and there are worlds to come. Reb Meir Simcha was considered by the consensus of Gedolei Torah of his generation to be Rosh Kol Bnei Agola, the greatest Talmid Chacham of the Dor. He functioned every moment as if the building was on fire. But he had time and heart and mind and place in his neshama for every yochid, for every individual. When the local river towards spring, the thaw, and it was flooding the whole area, and was about to flood Dvinsk. The Goyim in the city came to ask Reb Meir Simcha to go out and to daven. Eidos, testimony to that, was given by a super leftist here in Israel who grew up in Dvinsk. Why didn't he come to Ohr Somayach? That leftist? Well, we weren't here then. But there's something in the neshama that lends a person to be receptive to people hearing the same message, respond differently. They interpret it differently. You don't have to enact a Rorschach test to know that people interpret the exact same message in different ways. Sefer Albo says that's why we need a Torah Shebaal Peh. Because any written document lends itself to be interpreted by the orientation and the predisposition of the reader. So it helps. Is it then hermetically sealed? No, but it's damage control. And when you have a halacha that the testimony to that, the consensus of so many people coming from so many different positions, gives testimony to the uniqueness, to the idiosyncratic quality. It's so different that the outrageous claims that we make become not just possibilities, they become probabilities when we climb inside the understanding of the Nevuah and the dimensions of the Nevuah, and how they were anticipating how Jewish history would unfold, will unravel. Reb Meir Simcha brings a Gra, brings a Vilna Gaon. A few places he does that. Not many people, Achreinim, that he quotes the Gra, the Malbim. He quotes the Vilna Gaon as saying in the Parsha of the Novi Sheker, Parsha Re'eh, that this Novi has denied the Rebbeinu Shalom that took us out of Mitzrayim. And there are two phrases that are used there, that that he redeemed us from the house of slavery and he took us out of Mitzrayim, saved us from Mitzrayim. Says the Gra, there are two distinct events and experiences that are being described, two discrete watershed moments in history. At night, there was pidyon. There was redemption. Redemption is to substitute A for B. I'm being paid a B by substituting A. That's pidyon. It's a transaction, as it were. Kedushas domin, when something has the sanctity that it was initially only its monetary value was being delegated to Hegdish, then it's subject to pidyon. It's not be'etzem essentially Kedusha. And then there's Kedushas Haguf. When something doesn't have a mum, something is eligible for the Mizbeach, that's be'etzem essentially something which has Kedushas Haguf. Continues the Gra that Tefillah is comparable to pidyon. That's why in Yeshayahu, famous pasuk, Lama Bossi Einish, the Rebbeinu Shalom, as it were, complains, Lama Bossi Einish, Kosi Einaina, says the Gra, Bosi Einish, that's talking about davening. You need a minyan. There's the support of a minyan. Rameh Simcha in Parshas Vayechi develops beautifully the idea of the difference between Salusi Ubausi, that the Unclis renders Charbi Vikashti, my sword and my bow. Because a sword is steel, it's sharp, minimal amount of effort, it does its thing. The bow, you have to pull and pull for it to shoot forward, to catapult the arrow forward. Chalbi is the fixed tefillah with a minyan. When I daven with a minyan, then I have the support of those with me. If I'm adding a tefillah, a private tefillah, a bakosha, admirable, but then it needs, like a bow, it needs maximal kavanah. I'm not being energized by the tzibur. That's the difference between tefillah and limud HaTorah also, is that it's like pidyon. Tefillah needs a minyan and needs tzedakah. That's why we give tzedakah during the time of tefillah. Limud HaTorah is like Kedushas Haguf, says Rabnei Simcha. And Kedushas Haguf is mafkia midei shibud. If a guy had mortgaged chametz and given a loan to a Jew, and it remained by the Jew in the quarters of the Jew, then the Kedushas Haguf, the etzem, the chalois, the shibud, it's mafkia, could be, the chometz is like Kedushas Haguf, it's be'etzem. Similarly, that's the negative application of it, but you can make a behemoth that was an apotheke that was designated to be specifically the collateral for a particular loan also, that if it's Kedushas Haguf, it breaks the shibud. Similarly, what breaks the hold, the grip, the mortgage that the Yetzer Hara has on us? Moshcheo the Beis Medrash, drag him to the Beis Medrash. Limud HaTorah. Why? Because that's Kedushas Haguf. That's be'etzem. That's essential. Schiller, Kedushas Domin, pidyon. We need it. You like the Nefesh HaChaim, obviously. It's halacha. is a window of opportunity. That's our moment to increase the sanctity in the environment and to grow from that, or for the needs that we have, because we can't thrive without that. Sasemes. The brother of the Gur, in the Sefer Mailes HaTorah, has a fascinating insight that he gives us. He says that the Torah that we learned on Sinai, and that's the Torah that Pashtus is reviewed with the Malach before the Neshama comes down here. That is the specific Torah that this Neshama, each one of us, has to bring to be Megala in the Yeshishim Ribui Oisius L'Torah, Yisrael. Each one of us has that piece, that part to be Megala. Of course, it has to be in the context of Kol Torah Kula. If I'm not conversant and familiar with Torah, I can't learn my part. But the emphasis will be on what my shlichus, what the Rebbeinu Shalom has sent me here to be Megala. I would then submit that the difference between Ishtachavo, shockling when we learn forward and back, that's where I fit in the Davis. There's a space for me, Mokum. There was a place left, Lizgadabre, that I could flex the muscles of my neshama. And it's when I fit in, I know who my Rebbe is. I know who his Rebbe was. And I can chronicle it back to Sinai. And the other moment of simcha is that sense of joy in Limud HaTorah, which the Egleital, Rabavon Menahal, Rishon say that is what learning Torah is about. The learning in depth is to Lishtashea. The Rashash says that Ligmo Vahoda Lizbo, the Gemara and Avodah Zarah says, is to be Mishtashea, says the Rashash. And the Radak says it, that Shashuai, that David HaMelech calls Torah, is talking about the simcha of Torah, because when you reach the level of simcha of Torah, you don't forget. It becomes kol atzmoisai. Not like Rav Stern, which wanted to say that was more specifically tefillah. I would say that since it's the totality of everything, the kol atzmoisai, the hishtashea, and that simcha comes when I find my piece of what it is that I can bring here, now. And that's to learn in depth. And that was the amazing challenge 48 years ago when Ohr Somayach began. There was a difference of opinion. There wasn't a We didn't have a model of yeshivas to imitate. Something new. You're opening up a yeshiva for people who don't necessarily yet subscribe to our postulates and axioms. But you're dealing with adults. And the adult that walks in and just because of a touchy-feely experience is going to say, okay, I sign on, that's not the adult that we're confident will have the stamina for the long run. So how do you deal? So you need Rabbeim. Not lesser Talmidei Chachamim, but bigger Talmidei Chachamim, who can share and who have a passion to share. But they will share their sense of the depth, the scope, in that you're partaking of that moment that the Ramban describes of Ruach HaKodesh, of plugging into the Deiros. And the shashuai, the simcha of Limud HaTorah comes from learning it within depth and touching base and touching place with the Deiros. Newsman, understatement to say that we're living in unusual times. Yalkut in Koheles talks about Teresh Elamadati V'yapi Isha Omda, that which was learned under stress with more Yegiya, there's more simcha. Because the more I struggle through trying to penetrate the daf on another level, the more I am going to discover where my particular specific strengths are in my koiches hanefesh, and where I could put my emphasis. And it'll be more of the simcha that the Eglei Tal talks about. That simcha, that's learning lishma. That's simcha. Don't make the mistake that contravenes learning lishma. That is the lishma. Ravon ben Ahar, the Stipler talks about the possibility of making a brocha of Birkas Hanenin, that maybe is what Birkas HaTorah is about. It's a bit the enjoyment. But how do you get there? The more you struggle, the more api, the more you struggle. Finally, Medrash Rabbah and Kisisa says that Moshe Rabbeinu saw, witnessed, Benevuah, all of what Talmidei Chachamim, Talmud Vosik would be Mechadesh, called the Deiros. There's one Gilsa that all the questions they asked, Mashe Shoel, before Shem asked, they have to know the questions for it. Because Hein Advorim, it's the process. It's the question. It's the question that fixes the fusion of mind and heart to be caring and to rejoice in the mahalach, in the pshat that is going to resolve what seemed to be on one level, a contradiction. So, as we continue on, Big Kiddush Hashem was made by the Talmidim here, the Rabbeim here, that all through this period of time, the learning kept going. Siyumim, 31 Siyumim. Rabbi Avram, last night I spoke to a Talmud of ours, and he was telling me, Yonah Dov Rose, and he was telling me he's learning Yevomas Be'iyun like Rabbi Avram Kanek taught me to learn. And he is already flexing his muscles as a Malbitz Torah. Schiller Amanas L'Kabel Pras. But he's sharing. The Kiddush Hashem, the Kvod Shemayim, the Rabbeinu Yonah says we're approaching Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Ezra says to the assembled, assimilated Olim from Bavel that very reluctantly were coming back. They didn't know it was Rosh Hashanah. And they start crying. And he tells them, don't cry. The Shilchu Monos, you should eat. Yechlu Mamtakim, Shsu, Yechlu Shmeinim, Shsu Mamtakim. V'shilchu monos, and send portions to those who are not prepared because they didn't have anything in the freezer. Libi Oimali, that what Ezra is saying is, okay, you know now, but how many did we leave behind in Bavel that don't know? Shilchu monos in Ruchnius, to share. But there's a greater probability the more deeply I understand, enjoy what I am doing in Limud HaTorah than 48 years testify and a few thousand years since Maimed HaSinai testified to the fact that where Torah was Shashuai, then it wasn't Nishkach. And like the Rashash said, Shem Yitain, that we should have Yeshuas or Refuas for all of Klal Yisrael, Ruchnius, Gashmius, and we should have a Hatzlocha Dike Chedesh and year to come.